السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح.
لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله.
حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر.
الله أكبر الله أكبر.
لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وأحسن الهدي هدي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. We begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first, the last, our creator, our sustainer, the one who we worship and worship alone. And we bear witness that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the last and final messenger sent to humanity. O you who believe, have taqwa of Allah, which means to be conscious of Allah not just in front of people, but when we are alone and by ourselves, and do not die except in a state of complete submission to Allah, except in a state of Islam. Last year, there was an episode of a very, very famous game show called Wheel of Fortune. Wheel of Fortune has been on the air so long, grandmothers watch this show with their grandkids. It's broadcast all over the country. So on this episode, there is a contestant. Now the way this show works, for those that aren't familiar, you get a category, and then there's a board on the wall, and you guess the letters. And the more letters you can guess, the easier it's going to be for you to guess the word. So the category is character. And so this young man, he's saying what letter he wants. So he says, give me an L. And the host says, yes, there are 4 L's. And something very rare happens here. Every single letter lights up on the board. And they turn all the letters over. In other words, all he has to do now is what? Is just say the word. He doesn't even have to guess anything. And also when he spun here, he landed on the $1 million prize. You see, and it was between being bankrupt. So it's bankrupt, and $1 million. And he landed on the $1 million. And now all he has to do is say the word. So the first word is mythological. The second word is hero. And the third word is ACHILLES. So he says to the host, he said, I'd like to solve. So the host sarcastically laughs. He says, sure, go ahead. What else are you going to do? It's solve. He says, all right, I'd like to solve. Mythological, hero, Achilles. Now the crowd had kind of the same reaction you guys had, just complete silence. And they're looking around, and then the buzzer sounds. He says, I'm sorry, we can't accept that answer. So then they move to the contestant to his left. Now she's so excited that you can hear like her voice is cracking. She says, mythological hero, Achilles. So he loses $1 million. Now you're watching this, you're thinking, what was he thinking? And that's what we're going to talk about today, inshallah. Thinking about the art of thinking. So important is thinking. So important is using our intellect in Islam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the root words Ain, Qaf, Lam, Aql 49 times in the Quran. Now when I ask you, what is an intelligent person? You say, oh, that's easy. Somebody who gets good grades. That's how we measure intelligence. Or somebody that has good test scores. That's intelligence. And the ultimate, somebody who has a college degree, a higher education. That is the epitome of intelligence. Well, if you came here from work, which most of you did, and you logged off your PC, or you put your iPhone on silent, or you updated your Facebook status, or you saved a file to Dropbox, you are all using technology which was created by people who dropped out of college. And this contestant, by the way, this was on college week. He was an honors student. And he goes to a good school, and it's not like the poor guy just showed up yesterday to America. The guy is grown up here. We study Greek mythology in elementary school. So what does that tell us? It tells us our definition of intelligence is very limited. It's not that limited. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains to us what intelligence is in the Quran. So Allah says, وَلَدَارُ الْآخِرَةِ خَيْرٌ لِلَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. He says the next life is better for those who have taqwa. People who are conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said that life is better. He said, don't you think about this? Don't you use your intellect? It makes perfectly logical sense that Allah is telling you, live this short life and listen to Allah. And then your reward is eternal pleasure, eternal happiness. Now, what person who doesn't have two brain cells wouldn't say, wow, that's a really good deal. It's a guaranteed return. So this is how Allah is defining intelligence in one way. He's saying, just think about it. Before you want to follow your desires, before you want to do things that your inner nafs, your inner self wants you to do, think about it. Look at what you are getting in exchange. Now as we move on, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He uses two terms to describe people of intellect in the Quran. One is ulin nuha, and one is ulul albab. So let's look at both of them. So in one verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَمْ يَهْدِ لَهُمْ كَمْ أَهْلَكْنَا قَبْلَهُمْ مِنَ الْقُرُونِ يَمْشُونَ فِي مَسَاكِنِهِمْ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِأُولِي النُّهَى. He says that haven't you been guided? The Prophet ﷺ is addressing the Quraysh. Haven't you been guided? Don't you understand that people came before you who were destroyed? And you are actually walking in the exact same places that some of them used to walk. If you think and reflect upon this, if you use your brain, you'll see in this are signs for who? Ulin nuha. Now what does that mean? Because if you open up an English Quran, it'll say people of intellect. Even if you open up a basic Arabic Quran, it'll say ashabul uqul, people of intelligence. But why are they intelligent? Ulin nuha, this comes from nahi, manhiyun an. It means they stay away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told them to stay away from. Why do they stay away from it? Because the believer knows, the thinking believer knows, that anything that Allah told us to stay away from, there is benefit in it. Sometimes we see it, sometimes we won't. But even if we don't immediately see it, we know that there is benefit in it. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing these people here, that look at the people before you. Look what happened to them. They were destroyed. And this is a general principle for nations that came before us. How long can we keep poisoning the environment? How long can we keep destroying what the meaning of a family is and redefining it and this and that? How long can we keep doing this? What's happening in Baltimore right now? Lots of rioting. Why is that rioting happening? Does anybody think why this is happening? You know, nations that came before, when people in power abused it, those nations fell. Like the people of Shu'aib alayhi salam. What did he say to them? He said, وَلَا تَقْعُدُوا بِكُلِّ صِرَاطٍ تُوعِدُونَ وَتَصُدُّونَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ مَنْ آمَنَ بِهِ وَتَبْغُونَهَا عِوَجًا. What they used to do, the people of Shu'aib, it was like our society. They were businessmen. They were very, very rich. And they used to abuse their powers. So when people would come into the city, they would literally do highway robbery. And they would also cheat them when they would measure in the scales and everything like that. And then he says, وَلَا تُوعِدُونَ. He says, don't make them afraid. You see, when you lose that security, then you have lost a pillar of the society, an essential element for people. Most people that come to this country, why do they come here? Because they don't have safety back where they came from. And this is what's happening. In these riots, there's a group of people, minority people and people in general, they don't feel safe by people in power. So 1 month is Ferguson, 1 month it's Baltimore. It doesn't seem to make any difference. It's all the same. It's the same pattern over and over. Why is it happening? Because people are abusing their power. And when people abuse their power, then things don't turn out very well for a society. But the people who reflect, the people who think, the people who use their brain are seeing, look, there's got to be an underlying cause. People don't just wake up one day and say, let's go burn down our city. That's going to be good for us. Let's go riot. Let's go burn down our own school. Well, some students might be happy about that, but generally speaking, you don't wake up and just do that. Something is causing it, but nobody wants to address that problem because they're not thinking about it. So this is the first term that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses. The second term he uses is ulul albab. Very powerful ayah. Allah says, "Inna fi khalqis samawati wal ardi wa ikhtilafil layli wan nahari la ayatin li ulil albab." He says, in the creation of the heavens and the creations of the earth and the changing of the night in the day are signs for those people who are who? Ulul albab, people of intellect. Now what does this mean again? Now ulul albab, this albab comes from a root, lub. And lub is the inner core of a fruit. And the inner core of the fruit is the best part, isn't it? When you get a watermelon, you don't eat the outside. The outside has a peel over it. It's hard. Doesn't taste very good. You take the first bite, okay, alhamdulillah. Then you get in deeper and now you get to the juicy part. Now you get to the really good part. And that is the part of the brain that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling that the people of intellect use that part of the brain. You know, like when you were in school and your teacher asked you a question, and what did she say? She said, think deep before you answer this question. Think hard. She doesn't just want you to blurt the answer out. She wants you to use that inner core. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, that this is what these believers do. They use that inner portion of the brain. So they do it when they see the creation. And the creation of the heavens and the earth. You know, if we just move this whole planet just a little bit up, all of life would be destroyed. The al-itqan fil alam, the perfection of the universe is a sign alone that there is a God. And for the believer, your iman actually increases when you see these signs. It doesn't decrease. And for somebody who doesn't want to believe or is arrogant, this makes them farther away from Allah. So we see this, how perfect it is. We say, أَوَلَمْ يَرَوْا إِلَى الطَّيْرِ فَوْقَهُمْ صَافَّاتٍ وَيَقْبِضْ. Look at how birds just fly. There's thousands and thousands of varieties of them. And they're just flying around, they're just suspended in air. Who is ultimately behind that? The believer will admire the Creator. Others will admire the creation. They'll admire the creation. And it's foolish. Because many people say, well, if we can't prove it, then we don't believe it. Now, if I took the top brain surgeon here right now, and I asked them, in the world, top brain surgeon in the world, how much do we know about the brain? What's he going to tell me, or she? 2%? 3%? Maybe? So you're going to reject everything else based off of this 2%. So for me, it seems pretty logical to believe that there's a creator behind all of these incredible things. In about 6 hours, the sun is going to go down, and the moon's going to come up. For billions of years, the same thing's been happening. And they never run into each other. And when they do, we'll talk about that in a second. But how is that? Who's turning the lights out? How does that happen all the time, regularly for all these years? But it happens. This is a sign for people that reflect, for people that think about it. You know, many times when we want to increase our iman, we say, let's just read more nawafil, read more prayer, which is good. But if your relationship with the Creator is weak, that's why we're not benefiting from all of those. When the relationship is solid with the Creator, then all of this is going to help increase in that. And then he says, in the changing of the day and the night. What happens in a lunar eclipse? The sun is about 93 million miles away from the earth. The moon is about 240,000. And the sun is 500 times the diameter of the moon. It's much bigger. Yet what happens when the eclipse comes? The moon goes right in front, fits perfectly in there. Perfectly, despite the size difference, despite the distance, it fits perfectly. So what do some scientists say? They say, well, this is chance. This is luck. This is coincidence. Is it really? For it to happen so perfectly? And the believer will see this and say, no way. There has to be something going on here. This doesn't just happen like that. Right? So this is why Allah is saying. When's the last time? Have you ever taken your kids out at night and said, look at the moon. Who created that? Probably never. But what we'll do is we'll take the stick and try to beat in, make sure you do your prayer. And then we wonder, well, why don't they believe as much? It's hard in the environment. It's harder. So these are the things that will make it stable. When you go around and look, say, wow, subhanAllah, how did all of this happen? We'll see. And we'll start seeing the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But how do you do that? You have to do that by knowing Allah. That's why he says, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Know that there is no God except Allah. How do you know who Allah is? How do you know anything? How do you know physics? You have to open up a book and read about it. How do you know chemistry? You have to open up a book and read about it. Or go to a class and learn it. That's how you started to learn. Now that doesn't mean everybody's going to become a PhD in chemistry. But you can still have some idea. You don't have to become some big scholar to know Allah. But the more you spend time reflecting, the more you spend time improving yourself, then you will start to know Him. Now that does not mean that we're relying on the intellect alone. Don't get me wrong. Because that doesn't work. You can't just rely on your intellect, because as I stated earlier, there's too many things we don't understand. That's why I like when one of the da'is, those who call to Islam, he said it best. He said, you come to me, I'll tell you about Islam all day. But don't just come to me with an open mind. I need an open heart also. You see, you have to come with both. Don't just come with the open mind. And that's one of the unique things about our religion, is that we have both, and others don't. If you're only using the intellect, you're going to miss things and you will be a miserable person. Because we need that spiritual fix. If you're not using your brain, and you're just using the spiritual side, then you're not going to get anywhere. You're going to be years and years behind other people. So we need both. And we start to do this by knowing who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. Of course, we all know the great American icon, Muhammad Ali, the boxer. May Allah help him. He's suffering from a terrible disease, Parkinson's disease. But he was asked about that disease. And I don't know how the reporter asked it, but I could just picture that he or she was just doing it to try to get him to, make Islam look bad or something. You just know that that's what they were saying. And of course, Muhammad Ali used to say what? He used to say, I'm the greatest. And so they asked him, they said, you have all this fame and this wealth, and you have this terrible disease. And you know what he said? He said, Allah gave me this disease to show that He is the greatest, not me. That's knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما صلى الله عليه وسلم. Now when we're talking about thinking, this is a very important point. Very important. There's no neutrality when it comes to using your brain. Either you are thinking or you are not thinking. And I got news for you. If you're not thinking, then somebody is thinking for you. Now maybe we realize, why does the Quran always talk about don't follow the forefathers? Don't follow your forefathers. Because you're not thinking when you're doing that. There was he's an activist now, and used to be a president of a PR firm. A man by the name of Jerry Mander. He wrote this book called 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television. Now I know as soon as I said that, everybody says, okay, I know the 4 arguments. He's going to say, okay, it's a waste of time. Can everybody please move forward? Please move forward. he's going to say what? He's going to say, well, it's a waste of time, it's immoral. That's what he's going to say. Not a single argument does he make like that at all. That's what makes it so interesting. And you know, one of the arguments that he makes is what? One of the arguments he makes is that the television does the thinking for you. And that's the problem in itself. When we look at the people and we see their perceptions about Islam, why do they think about that? Why do they have a negative perception? Did they go to the library and sit in there and study for hours and say, yeah, you know, we really don't like Islam? Is that what they did? Or did they just listen to sound bites? Even our own selves. Some of the perceptions we have about race, about different places, about different people. How did that come about? Did we really get the time to know somebody? Did we really study it, read about it? Probably not. So this is why it's so important. You know, one of the best examples I've heard was actually in this masjid over a decade ago. And maybe we forgot, there's a lot of new people, so it's worth repeating. And this was when Sheikh Yasser was talking about, there was an experiment that some scientists did. So what they did was they took 10 monkeys, and they brought the monkeys into a room, and they had a batch of bananas hanging there. And then they had a hose. And so they brought the monkeys into the room. Monkeys like bananas. So one monkey goes to the bananas. What happens? As soon as he gets on the stool and reaches, the water comes and hoses him down and hoses all the other monkeys down. Ice cold water. Okay. Then another monkey tries. He goes up. What happens? He gets hosed down and all the other monkeys get hosed down. This happens 3 or 4 times, and finally the monkeys, what do they start doing? They stop going for the bananas. These 10 monkeys. Now what do? Now they replaced one monkey and brought a new monkey in. The new monkey does what? Goes straight to the bananas. But before he gets to the bananas, what happens? The other monkeys that are there already grab him and start beating him up. Okay, monkey doesn't go for the bananas. So now we have 9 monkeys, and we have a new monkey. Now they replace another monkey. So another monkey comes in. Where does this monkey go? Straight to the bananas. Once he gets to the bananas, all these monkeys start beating him up, including the previous monkey who's never even seen the hose. Okay, now what? Now they replace another monkey. Now a new monkey comes in. Now there's 2 monkeys who have never seen any consequences of taking bananas. And then there's 7 other monkeys, and there's a brand new monkey. Brand new monkey does what? Goes straight in, goes for the bananas. All the monkeys start beating him up, including the 2 monkeys who have never seen anything that's happened from grabbing the bananas. And they keep doing this over and over and over again until finally what happens? Every monkey is brand new. So every monkey is brand new, so they bring in, let's call it a brand new monkey. This monkey comes in, starts going to the bananas, all these 10 monkeys start beating him up. And they've never seen it. And what were they trying to prove in this experiment? The monkeys were not thinking for themselves. Somebody else was doing the thinking for them. And that's why he has this CD, and the title is, Are You a Monkey? And that's not a question we want to answer yes to. Okay? So this is what happens if you don't think for yourself. So where do we begin? How do we get the brain cells firing? The first verse of the Quran. That was revealed. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. Now this was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, and when we read the Quran, we can read it through the copy or recite it. That's also called reading. But it's a general principle. الَّذِي عَلَّمَ بِالْقَلَمِ. Allah also says here, the one who taught by the pen. Our whole intellectual foundation is based off of reading and writing. And you can't get away from that. As they say what? Readers are leaders. Look at the literacy rate of the developed world. 98%, 99%. If you look at, I don't like to use this term, but we'll just use it, 3rd world countries, what's their literacy rate? 50% or less. And then here's the crazy part. If you go to areas that are not that well off here, or in countries overseas, you can go to the poorest neighbor and guess what you're going to find? Satellite television. These are people that can't read and there's a satellite television. And for those who have never visited a library, they're nice places. The books are free at the library. You don't have to pay for them. You actually go and they give you the books for free. Yet still, there's a satellite television in there. And books, overseas, forget about that. I mean, they are cheap. Really, really cheap. Although they have made the satellite less expensive so everybody has it, that's another discussion. But still, the books are very, very cheap. You know, people say, brother, I'm from a village back home. People say this, right? So last year after our exams, I had a classmate, and he said, I'm going to take you to the balad. We're going to the village. So this was one of those, like, I'm not exactly, so one of those you take like 2 or 3 buses to get there, and then you walk through, and half the time you're worried about your life, and there's animals running around everywhere. So we get here, and just picture it's just barren desert. It's a small hut. There's a big camel and goats, all kinds of things running around, and we're sitting on the ground watching Al Jazeera. And that family could not read. They couldn't read, but they could watch the television. Now, the classmate that took me was actually the first one in his family that was able to read. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make him, nafa'allahu bihi, may Allah benefit the ummah from him. He also had the highest scores of everybody. He was the #1 student. But he took this initiative. He said, I got to learn. There's no way out. Even though the future is very bleak in many parts of the world for these kinds of people, but still, he took that initiative. So that lack of priorities is so common there. And it shouldn't be like that. So now where do we begin? So you begin tonight or this weekend? Because I know we're the ADD generation. We don't sit still for more than 10 seconds. And then when the kid is 2, we put an iPad in front of their face. There's a school in Northern California. All these top executives send their kids there. The Google executives, the Yahoo executives. You won't find a single computer there. There's not a single computer. Steve Jobs, when they asked him one time, they said, how do your kids like the new iPad? He said, I don't have this in my home. And in that school, they actually make the kids do things like use their hands. Put things together, because these are very important. Writing, it helps develop skills. Reading helps develop skills, not Googling. Right? So, in the beginning, it's a very painful process, but you have to start. What's going to happen? You're going to open up the book, and you won't even you'll be counting the holes in the ceiling. You'll be looking at the side of you won't even make it through the page. But then as you continue, you will see that this is really the way to get that depth, to really get to know something. A tweet does not teach you anything in depth. It may make you feel nice for a few minutes, but that's not how you really learn. You got to pick up a book you actually have to read. It's probably the biggest regret of my life that I didn't do it earlier. But this is how it has to be. It gets you that depth and helps you get to the core. So of course the best place to start is the Quran, but pick anything that interests you. If you never liked history, don't start reading a book on history. Just pick anything and time yourself, and you will not regret it. I promise you. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from amongst those who use our intellect to know Him, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the joy and the love of reading, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to return this ummah to when it used to value learning and education. There's a few announcements here. First, we make dua for the mother of our board member, Brother Muhammad Malas, who passed away in Jordan. Allahumma aghfir laha wa'afu anha wa akrim nuzulaha. May Allah forgive her and give patience to the family. And the family will be accepting condolences this Sunday from 5 to 8 p.m. in the multipurpose room. OCIF garage sale is tomorrow between 7 and 1 p.m. And your help is needed after the prayer to bring the donation items from the back parking lot to the MPR. OCIF Family Matters Seminars on Friday, May 8th with Sister Noha Ash-Shulairi talking about emotions matter. Babysitting and refreshments will be provided. Thank you to the volunteers who participated in our blood drive last Sunday. And OCIF Family Barbecue with Sheikh Yasser today at 5:30 at Alicia Park, as well as the youth group today after Maghrib. And finally, Uplift Charity is holding their annual fundraising gala on Saturday, May 9th. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب اللهم انصر الإسلام وعز المسلمين اللهم انصر إخواننا في كل مكان يا أرحم الراحمين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وأقم الصلاة